I have two fundamental rules in my classroom. First, we use our inside voices. Second, a parent's signature on the daily communication notebook is non-negotiable. I can negotiate with 4-year-olds throwing violent tantrums because their bananas were sliced into circles instead of triangles. I do not negotiate with fully grown adults who fail at basic administrative tasks. I teach at Little Stars, an aggressively expensive private preschool in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. My daily environment consists of organic Play-Doh Mozart in the background and hedge fund parents who view their children as high-yield investments. I am Julian Hayes. I have mild obsessive-compulsive disorder regarding spatial organization, a master's degree in early childhood psychology, and an absolute zero-tolerance policy for nonsense. Which brings me to Rosie Romano. Rosie is an angel. She is 4 years old, has hair the color of midnight, and observes the world with the heavy, solemn stillness of a tiny tax auditor. She is a transfer student supposedly arriving from a complex family situation in Brooklyn. I liked her immediately. What I did not like was her communication notebook. It landed on my meticulously organized desk at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. The notebook was soggy. Furthermore, it featured a massive, suspicious red smear across the front cover that looked exactly like a fresh crime scene. If any of the Upper East Side mothers had seen it, they would have called the NYPD the FBI, and possibly a priest. I simply picked it up with 2 fingers and sniffed it. Tabasco sauce, extra spicy, not blood. However, the real crime was inside. Blank. No signature, no acknowledgement of the weekly reading log. Just an empty line mocking my classroom policies. I made a mental note to address this during the mandatory parent-teacher orientation that evening. The meeting began at 7 p.m. The classroom was filled with people wearing cashmere sweaters and anxiety. They were perched awkwardly on tiny pastel-colored plastic chairs meant for toddlers sipping sparkling water. I was midway through my presentation on the psychological benefits of finger painting when the classroom door opened. They did not just enter the room, they altered the atmospheric pressure. 4 men walked into my pastel-colored sanctuary like a localized weather event. They wore tailored black suits that cost more than my annual salary, and they moved with the coordinated predatory grace of people who evaluated exits and blind spots before looking at the decor. The man in the front was tall. Catastrophically tall. He possessed the kind of sharp, cold jawline that belonged on a billboard for expensive watches or dangerous decisions. His eyes were the color of winter concrete, scanning the room with absolute disdain. Behind him were 3 others. A giant who looked like a walking mountain, who I would later learn was named Bruno, a man with a severe scar bisecting his left eyebrow named Frankie, and a leaner, dead-eyed sniper type named Silas. The temperature in the classroom dropped by 10 degrees. A hedge fund dad in the front row audibly stopped breathing. The leader of this heavily armed boy band stopped in the center of the room. He looked at the tiny chairs. He looked at the finger paintings. Then he looked at me. Whoever decided to mandate this meeting at 7 in the evening, he set his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated in the floorboards, has 0 respect for my schedule. Make it fast. Kinds of people who waste my time usually do not get to keep their tongues. Silence descended. It was a thick, terrified silence. Bruno cracked his knuckles. Frankie glared. Silas leaned against the doorframe, effectively blocking the only exit. The Upper East Side parents looked like they were mentally writing their wills. I looked at the man. I looked at the soggy, Tabasco-stained notebook on my desk. I picked up my wooden pointer ruler. A sharp smacking sound echoed as I brought the ruler down flat against my desk. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Frankie twitched. The leader narrowed his eyes. And whoever sent this notebook back without a signature, I said, my voice completely flat, matching his volume perfectly, has 0 respect for the development of their child's fine motor skills, Mr. Romano. Sit down. The man stared at me. I stared back. I stare down toddlers who think eating glitter is a viable dietary choice on a daily basis. A 6'3" mob boss radiating homicidal intent is frankly a step down in difficulty. At least he is supposedly toilet trained. Excuse me, Victor Romano said softly, the kind of soft that usually precedes extreme violence. Inside voices, Mr. Romano, I corrected, tapping the ruler against my palm. You are disrupting the learning environment. Furthermore, threatening to sever the tongues of educational professionals is a clear violation of the Parent Code of Conduct on page 4 of your handbook. Now, find a chair, sit. Something entirely unprecedented happened. Victor Romano's brain appeared to short-circuit. He was clearly a man who was used to people screaming, running, or begging. He was completely unequipped to handle someone treating him like a disobedient golden retriever. He blinked. He looked at the ruler in my hand, then at my face, searching for a trace of fear. He found nothing, only deep, profound irritation at his lack of punctuality. Slowly, almost mechanically, the most dangerous man in New York stepped backward. He lowered his massive frame onto a tiny, bright yellow plastic chair shaped like a duck. His knees practically touched his chin. Behind him, Bruno, Frankie, and Silas exchanged looks of pure, unadulterated horror. Their boss had just been subdued by a preschool teacher in a beige cardigan. "Excellent," I said smoothly, turning back to the whiteboard as if I had not just mentally broken a Mafia don. Now, regarding the emotional regulation of 4-year-olds, an hour later, the meeting concluded. The parents fled the room like it was on fire. Victor Romano stood up, straightening his suit, his expression a complicated mix of humiliation and dangerous curiosity. He approached my desk. I did not look up. I simply slid Rosie's notebook across the desk toward him. Right on the front cover, next to the Tabasco stain, I had placed a large shiny sticker of a frowning cartoon rain cloud. "Sign it. Bring it back tomorrow. Have a good evening, Mr. Romano," I said, finally meeting his eyes. Victor looked at the sad sticker. He looked at me. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering near his ear. He did not say a word. He just picked up the notebook, turned, and walked out, his 3 giant shadows following closely behind. I let out a long, quiet exhale once the door clicked shut, spraying a generous amount of lavender disinfectant on the desk where he had stood. Well, I thought to myself, organizing my highlighters by color spectrum, I am definitely never seeing that man again. I live in Brooklyn because I am an educator, and Manhattan real estate is a localized comedy routine I refuse to participate in. My apartment is small, excessively organized, and situated precisely 1 block away from a 24-hour bodega that sells terrible coffee and excellent peace of mind. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Thursday. I was awake because I was grading developmental assessment charts, and my brain had decided that sleep was an optional biological construct. I put on my coat, grabbed my wallet, and walked to the bodega with the sole intention of purchasing a black coffee and a blueberry muffin that had likely been baked during the previous presidential administration. The bodega was usually empty at this hour, save for Hector behind the counter and the occasional stray cat. Tonight, however, the atmosphere was different. It felt heavy. It felt like the air before a thunderstorm or the silence right before a 4-year-old throws a wooden block at a window. I walked down the narrow fluorescent-lit aisle toward the coffee machine. Then I stopped. The baby care aisle was completely blocked. 4 men in custom-tailored black suits were standing in a semicircle around the diaper and formula section. They were staring at the brightly colored packaging with the kind of intense, sweating desperation usually reserved for defusing explosive devices. It was the boy band of organized crime from Tuesday night. I observed them from the end of the aisle. Bruno, the mountain of a man, was holding a tiny pink pacifier between 2 massive fingers, looking at it as if it might suddenly detonate. Frankie, the man with the facial scar, was frantically reading the back of a baby wipe packet, his lips moving as he analyzed the chemical ingredients. Silas, the sniper, was holding 2 different cans of formula, looking between them with the narrowed, calculating eyes of a man doing advanced ballistics math. And Victor Romano, the supposed terror of the New York underworld, was leaning his forehead against the metal shelving unit, looking like a man who had entirely lost his will to live. His tie was loosened. His suit jacket looked rumpled. "Jazam, boss," Silas said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "This one says step 2. But this one says pro-advance. Which one is strategically superior? I do not know, Silas." Victor muttered, his voice muffled by the metal shelf. "I run a syndicate, not a pediatric ward. Just buy the entire shelf. We will figure it out at the penthouse." "We cannot buy the whole shelf, boss," Frankie said, sounding genuinely distressed. "What if it has parabens? Do you know what parabens do to the dermal layer of an infant? It is a chemical warfare zone." I stood there for another 10 seconds, letting my annoyance battle with my profound sense of professional exasperation. The annoyance lost. Leaving 4 grown men to be defeated by basic childcare supplies went against every pedagogical instinct I possessed. I walked down the aisle. My footsteps were quiet, but they all snapped their heads toward me instantly, hands dropping to their waistbands in a synchronized display of lethal muscle memory. Then they registered my face, the beige cardigan, the complete lack of intimidation. "Stand down," Victor ordered softly, running a hand over his face. He looked at me. The homicidal aura from the preschool was completely gone, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated exhaustion of a man who had not slept in a week. "Mr. Hayes." "Mr. Romano," I replied smoothly. I walked right past him, stepping into the center of their lethal circle. I reached out and physically pushed Silas's hand down. "Put the formula back, Silas. Rosie is 4 years old. She has a full set of teeth. She needs lactose-free whole milk and solid foods, not infant formula. Buying this implies a fundamental misunderstanding of human biology." Silas blinked slowly, placing the can back on the shelf like a scolded child. I turned to Frankie. "Put the wipes down. You want the water-based ones on the bottom shelf. No fragrance. And Bruno, that pacifier is for a newborn. If you give that to a 4-year-old, she will swallow it, and you will be performing the Heimlich maneuver before 3 a.m. Bruno gasped softly and dropped the pacifier back into the bin as if it were on fire. Finally, I turned to Victor. He was staring at me. He was not glaring. He was looking at me the way a drowning man looks at a life raft. "She will not sleep," Victor said. The gravel in his voice was not threatening anymore. It was broken. "She just sits on the floor of my living room and stares at the door. I bought her a $1,000 dollhouse. I bought her a pony. She does not care. She woke up screaming an hour ago and the nanny quit because Bruno glared at her." "I did not glare," Bruno whispered defensively. "I was just doing a perimeter threat assessment." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "You cannot buy a 4-year-old's emotional regulation with a pony, Mr. Romano. She is in a new environment. She is terrified. She needs routine consistency and a guardian who does not look like he is about to execute the grocery store clerk." Victor looked down at his expensive, scuffed Italian leather shoes. For a fraction of a second, the Mafia boss vanished entirely. "She is my brother's only legacy," he said, the words slipping out barely above a whisper. The weight of that sentence hung in the fluorescent air, heavy with a grief that I instantly recognized. It was not just stress. It was the crushing guilt of a survivor. "I cannot break her, Julian. I do not know how to do this." I did not offer sympathy. Sympathy is useless to men like him. Instead, I offered structure. I grabbed a pack of chamomile tea and shoved it into Victor's chest. "Make this. Warm it up. Add honey. Sit on the floor with her at her eye level. Do not speak. Just be a safe, quiet presence until she falls asleep. Do you understand?" Victor gripped the box of tea. He nodded once sharply. "Good," I said, turning to walk toward the checkout counter. "Wait," Victor called out. I stopped, glancing back over my shoulder. Silas was holding out a sleek black smartphone. "Your number, Mr. Hayes, please." I looked at the phone. I looked at the 4 incredibly dangerous, incredibly pathetic men standing in the diaper aisle. I took the phone and typed my number in. "This is strictly for educational emergencies regarding Rosie," I said, handing it back. "If you call me to hide a body, I will block you." Victor's mouth twitched. It was not a smile, but it was close. "Understood, Mr. Hayes." I paid for my stale coffee and left. As I walked back to my apartment, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text message from an unknown number read, "The tea worked. She is asleep, signed V." I stared at the screen for a long time. I saved the contact as "Do Not Answer Mob Boss," locked my door, and realized with absolute certainty that my quiet, meticulously organized life was officially over. I have always maintained that firm boundaries are the cornerstone of a functional society. Unfortunately, the Romano Syndicate views personal boundaries the exact same way they view the New York Penal Code, as a set of mild, highly flexible suggestions. It started on a Tuesday, exactly 5 days after the bodega incident. Victor Romano knocked on my apartment door at 6 p.m., holding a perfectly intact organic zucchini and looking completely lost. He claimed he needed a consultation on pureed vegetable integration. By Thursday, my meticulously curated beige and white sanctuary had been unofficially annexed as a Mafia daycare center. Let me paint a picture of my living room on a Friday evening. Frankie, a man who has likely dissolved human remains in acid, was on his hands and knees, aggressively sterilizing my coffee table with 99% isopropyl alcohol because Rosie had sneezed within a 3-foot radius of it. At my kitchen island sat Silas. The deadliest marksman on the eastern seaboard was wearing a floral apron he had found in my pantry. He was hovering over a cutting board with a tactical notebook, meticulously copying my instructions. The structural integrity of the nori seaweed is compromised by excessive moisture. Silas noted, his voice a dead serious monotone. Precisely, Silas, I said, whisking a bowl of matcha. You must wait for the rice to reach room temperature before applying the seaweed. Otherwise, your panda bento box will look like a structural collapse. Silas nodded grimly, writing "wait for rice cooldown" critical in block letters. In the corner, taking up an entire armchair, was Bruno. The human mountain was wielding 2 knitting needles the size of drumsticks. He was halfway through crafting a neon pink scarf, his massive tattooed fingers looping the yarn with terrifying speed and surprising delicacy. And then there was Victor. The undisputed boss of the Romano family was sitting cross-legged on my beige rug, his expensive suit jacket discarded on a dining chair. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and ink. Sandwiched between his knees was Rosie, happily sucking on a juice box, completely oblivious to the fact that her uncle was currently engaged in a life-or-death struggle with a pink hair scrunchie. I do not understand the physics of it, Victor muttered, staring at the handful of dark hair. If I pull the left quadrant over the center, the structural tension fails. I sighed, setting down my whisk, and walked over to them. I knelt on the rug behind Victor. You are overthinking it, Mr. Romano. It is a French braid, not a hostage negotiation, I said. Drop your shoulders. You are holding your breath again. I reached forward. My fingers brushed over his knuckles to adjust his grip. He went perfectly still at the contact, the sudden sharp heat of his skin radiating through my hands. I ignored the unexpected spike in my own pulse and physically guided his massive hands through the motion. Left over center, right over center, add a section. Do you feel the pattern? I asked softly, my voice just above his ear. Yes, Victor rasped. His voice was lower than usual, carrying a slight, gravelly edge that vibrated in the quiet room. He did not look at the hair, he was looking straight ahead, his jaw tight. Good. Finish it, I instructed, pulling my hands back and standing up. I wiped my palms on my trousers, suddenly feeling very warm. By 10:30 p.m., the goons had been dispatched to secure the perimeter, which meant they went down to the street to smoke and argue about sports, and Rosie was fast asleep in my spare bedroom. They had effectively commandeered the room by moving in a custom-built, ridiculously expensive princess bed without my explicit permission. The apartment was suddenly very quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sirens of Brooklyn. I walked into the living room carrying 2 ceramic mugs. I handed one to Victor, who was sitting on the sofa staring blankly at the wall, looking utterly depleted. He took the mug, sniffing it suspiciously. What is this? Warm almond milk with a dash of cinnamon and vanilla, I said, sitting on the opposite end of the sofa, tucking one leg under me. I drink Scotch Julian, or black coffee. You drink warm milk in this apartment, I corrected smoothly. It promotes melatonin production. You look like a reanimated corpse, Victor. Drink it. He glared at me for a fraction of a second before bringing the mug to his lips. He took a sip. I saw his shoulders instantly drop 2 inches. She laughed today, Victor said, quietly staring into the mug. The ruthless Mafia Don was completely gone. In the dim light of my living room, he was just a tired man trying to keep his family together. Bruno dropped a meatball on his shoe, and she laughed. A real laugh. Children are resilient, Victor. They adapt to structure and love, I said gently. He looked at me, his slate gray eyes catching the warm light of the lamp. I do not know what I would have done if you had not walked down that diaper aisle. You would have bought the entire shelf, panicked, and eventually hired a team of pediatricians to live in your penthouse. I replied. A tiny, genuine smile touched the corner of his mouth. Probably. We sat in a comfortable, heavy silence. I opened my planner to review tomorrow's lesson plans, letting the quiet envelop us. 10 minutes later, I heard a soft, rhythmic breathing. I looked up. Victor had slumped sideways against the cushions, sound asleep. The mug was dangerously close to tipping out of his hands. I set my planner down, walked over, and carefully extracted the mug from his loose grip. As I reached over him to grab a woven throw blanket from the back of the sofa, he muttered something in his sleep. I paused, leaning in closer. A dark Mafia secret A hit order. He mumbled the melody of a children's song about a baby shark, his brow furrowing in deep, unconscious concentration. I pressed my lips tightly together to stop myself from laughing out loud. I draped the blanket over his broad shoulders, lingering for a second to brush a stray lock of dark hair away from his forehead. I looked at the sleeping mob boss on my couch, then at the pink scarf Bruno had left on the armchair, and finally at the sterile coffee table. Well, I thought turning off the lamp. My boundaries are officially ruined. The Upper East Side is generally immune to organized crime. The residents are far more likely to engage in vicious, bloodless warfare over kindergarten admissions or hedge fund acquisitions than physical violence. Therefore, when actual danger arrives, it stands out like a neon sign in a monastic library. It was 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, dismissal time. The courtyard of Little Stars was filled with the usual chaos of nannies, organic snacks, and expensive strollers. I was standing near the wrought iron front gates holding a clipboard and a bright yellow battery-operated megaphone that I normally used to direct the annual Easter egg hunt. That was when I noticed the men. There were 5 of them. They did not wear bespoke Italian suits like the Romanos. They wore cheap, aggressively distressed leather jackets and heavy boots. They smelled like stale tobacco cheap cologne and malicious intent. They arranged themselves in a loose, tactical semicircle directly blocking the exit gates, their eyes scanning the children. I recognized the type immediately. I'd grown up in Brooklyn a few blocks from territories controlled by the Falcone family. These were Falcone enforcers, and considering the Romano heir was currently playing with wooden blocks in my classroom, their presence was not a coincidence. The air in the courtyard grew thick. The nannies stopped talking. A collective primal sense of unease rippled through the playground. Then the screech of tires shattered the silence. A matte black SUV jumped the curb, coming to a violent halt inches from the Falcone men. The doors flew open. Victor Romano stepped out. I had spent the last 3 weeks watching this man learn how to puree carrots and struggle with French braids. I had almost forgotten who he actually was. The man who stepped out of that SUV was the Grim Reaper in a tailored suit. His face was carved from glacial ice. His eyes were devoid of anything remotely human. Behind him, Bruno, Frankie, and Silas poured out of the vehicle, hands already reaching inside their jackets. The Falcone men reached for their waistbands. Victor drew a matte black handgun with a speed that defied physics. We were exactly 5 seconds away from a bloody Mafia shootout in the middle of a preschool courtyard. I did not think. I reacted with the deeply ingrained absolute authority of an early childhood educator who has a strict zero-tolerance policy for playground violence. I raised the yellow megaphone to my mouth and pressed the siren button. A deafening, high-pitched wail from the siren cut through the lethal tension like a chainsaw. All 10 heavily armed men violently flinched. Victor's head snapped toward me, his gun lowering slightly in sheer, unadulterated shock. The Falcone men grabbed their ears. I released the siren button and brought the megaphone closer to my lips. "Gentlemen," my voice boomed across the courtyard, amplified and dripping with profound disappointment. "We do not use weapons to solve our interpersonal conflicts. Put those away immediately." Silence fell, utter, bewildered silence. The Falcone leader, a man with a broken nose and a neck tattoo, stared at me as if I had just fallen from orbit. "Excuse me," the Falcone leader growled, trying to recover his menacing aura. "Mind your business, Teach. We have a message for Romano." I marched forward, my beige cardigan catching the autumn breeze right into the no man's land between the two syndicates. I stopped directly in front of the Falcone leader. I did not use the megaphone this time. I used my teacher voice. It is a tone that conveys absolute psychological dominance. I'm currently minding my business, which is the physical and emotional safety of this environment, I said, looking him dead in the eye. "Now let us discuss your behavior. Your posture is atrocious. You are slouching, which projects severe insecurity. Furthermore, resorting to physical intimidation in front of minors indicates a profound lack of emotional vocabulary." The man blinked. His brain was clearly struggling to process the data. You are acting out. I continued smoothly, tilting my head. "Is this because the Romanos have a larger territory? Are you feeling inadequate because threatening a preschool is not going to heal your inner child? It just makes you look thoroughly pathetic." Someone behind me, it sounded like Silas, let out a muffled, choked sound. "Listen here, you little..." Another Falcone goon started taking a step forward. I raised my wooden clipboard and pointed it directly at his nose. "We use our words, not our bodies. Back up." Now, he actually took a step back. The psychological whiplash was absolute. These men were trained to handle bullets, knives, and screaming victims. They had absolutely zero defense against a man treating them like toddlers throwing a tantrum over a stolen juice box. This guy is insane, the leader muttered, looking genuinely unnerved. He looked at Victor, then back at me. We're leaving, but this is not over, Romano. Make sure you use the crosswalk, I called out cheerfully after them as they practically fled down the street, deeply unsettled by the entire experience. I lowered the megaphone, letting out a small sigh, and turned around. I expected Victor to be amused. I expected relief. Instead, Victor was staring at me, his chest heaving, his face pale. The handgun was still gripped tightly by his side. The homicidal rage had vanished, replaced by something much worse, absolute paralyzing terror. Mr. Romano, I started to say, taking a step toward him. Stop, Victor commanded. His voice was a harsh, gravelly rasp. He did not look at me. He looked past me toward the classroom doors where Rosie was safely inside with the assistant teacher. Then his eyes locked onto mine. The warmth that had been building between us over the last few weeks was entirely gone. His eyes were cold steel, slamming shut like a vault door. Victor, I asked quietly, dropping my professional tone. You should not have done that, he said, his voice terrifyingly flat. You do not know these people, Julian. You do not know what you just inserted yourself into. I was de-escalating a situation. You made yourself a target. Victor practically shouted, the sudden volume making me flinch. He ran a shaking hand through his dark hair, looking away. My brother thought he was safe too. He thought he was removed from it. He was not. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He was not angry. He was terrified. In my attempt to protect my playground, I had just activated his deepest trauma. I had shown him exactly how easily his violent world could bleed into my safe one and how easily I could be caught in the crossfire. Victor, I am fine. They are gone, I said, keeping my voice gentle. No, Victor said, slowly stepping back. He finally met my gaze, and the distance in his eyes broke my heart just a little bit. I forgot what this was. I forgot what I bring with me. I will not make that mistake again. He turned to his men. Silas, get Rosie. We are leaving. Victor, do not interfere with my family's business anymore, Mr. Hayes, Victor said. The use of my formal title was deliberate, a wall snapping back into place. It is not safe for you. He did not wait for a reply. 3 minutes later, the black SUV pulled away, leaving me standing alone in the quiet courtyard, holding a yellow megaphone, realizing with a heavy, sinking feeling that my meticulously guarded boundaries had not just been breached. They had been completely destroyed, and now the man who destroyed them was walking away. 3 weeks is exactly 21 days. In those 21 days, my apartment returned to its pristine beige and white equilibrium. There were no giant men aggressively sterilizing my coffee table. There were no lethal snipers analyzing the structural integrity of my seaweed. My evenings consisted of Earl Grey tea classical music and absolute agonizing silence. I had my meticulously guarded boundaries back. I hated them. As an early childhood educator, I spent my days teaching 4-year-olds how to identify and articulate their complex emotions. Yet here, I was a 28-year-old man with a master's degree, stubbornly refusing to admit that I missed a homicidal mafia boss and his socially inept syndicate. The universe, however, has a distinct lack of respect for my denial. It happened on a Thursday evening. I was walking out of my local bodega with a black coffee when 3 matte black SUVs aggressively boxed me in on the sidewalk. I did not even flinch. I just took a sip of my terrible coffee and waited. The doors opened. Out stepped Bruno, Frankie, and Silas. They did not look like the terrifying enforcers of the New York underworld. They looked like they had been subjected to a grueling, weeks-long corporate team-building retreat in a windowless basement. Silas's left eye was twitching violently. Frankie looked like he was on the verge of tears. Gentlemen, I said calmly, I am off the clock. If Rosie is experiencing a behavioral regression, please refer to Chapter 4 of the Parenting Handbook I provided. It is not Rosie. Bruno practically sobbed, his massive shoulders slumping. It is the boss. Mr. Hayes, you have to help us. He is broken. I am an educator, Bruno, not a mechanic, I replied. He made the capos learn conversational Latin. Frankie blurted out, his voice cracking with genuine trauma. He said physical violence is a sign of a weak vocabulary. He made a guy who runs an illegal gambling ring write a 500-word essay on conflict resolution. If someone slouched at the weekly meeting, he made them stand in the corner. We cannot live like this. I stared at them. Victor Romano, undisputed terror of the East Coast, was apparently handling his emotional breakdown by projecting my preschool disciplinary tactics onto a heavily armed crime syndicate. "Silas," I said, turning to the sniper, "you are usually the logical one. Explain." Silas looked at me with dead, exhausted eyes. He is attempting to sanitize an inherently violent ecosystem to penalize himself for his perceived failures. Also, he has not slept in 4 days, and he reorganized the armory by the manufacturer's alphabetical Latin root names. Please, Mr. Hayes, we are begging you. I let out a long, slow exhale. I dropped my coffee cup into the nearest recycling bin. "Take me to him," I said. 20 minutes later, I was standing in the foyer of Victor Romano's penthouse. It was a massive, cold expanse of glass steel and dark marble. It felt less like a home and more like a high-altitude mausoleum. I instructed the 3 goons to stay in the hallway, straightened my cardigan, and walked into his private office. The room was practically pitch black, save for the city lights bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Victor was sitting behind a massive oak desk, staring blankly at a crystal glass of untouched scotch. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and the shadows under his eyes looked like bruises. I told the guards no interruptions. Victor rasped, his voice rough and hollow. He did not look up. "Your guards are currently terrified of being assigned an essay on Roman philosophy, so they let me right through," I said, flipping the light switch. The overhead lights flared to life. Victor violently flinched, his head snapping up. For a second, his hand drifted toward the drawer where I assumed he kept a weapon before his brain registered my face. He froze entirely. "Julian E.," he breathed. The sound of my name in his mouth felt like a physical impact in the quiet room. "Your posture is atrocious, Mr. Romano," I said, walking briskly across the room. I stopped directly in front of his desk, crossing my arms. Enforcing adult men to learn Latin as a trauma response is not a recognized psychological coping mechanism. Victor stood up slowly, bracing his hands on the desk. He looked like a man fighting a war inside his own head. "I told you to stay away from us. I told you it was not safe." "You did," I agreed smoothly. "But as we have previously established, I do not negotiate with tantrums." "It is not a tantrum!" Victor suddenly shouted, the volume echoing sharply in the cavernous office. He rounded the desk, stopping a few feet from me. His chest was heaving, the icy facade completely shattering. "My brother is dead because of me. I brought this world to his doorstep because I was not careful enough. I let you in. I let you get close to my family, and those Falcone men showed up at your playground. If they had pulled the trigger..." He stopped, his voice breaking. He looked away, his hands curling into tight fists. "I am Poison Julian. Everything I touch gets caught in the crossfire. I will not be responsible for your death." The room fell silent. I looked at the most dangerous man in New York, and all I saw was a terrified, guilt-ridden survivor drowning in his own self-hatred. I took a step forward. I did not offer a hug. I did not offer soft, tearful comfort. I offered the one thing he desperately needed: absolute, unwavering structure. "Are you quite finished with this tragic hero performance?" I asked, my voice cutting through the heavy air like a scalpel. Victor snapped his gaze back to me, looking genuinely stunned. "What?" I asked if you are finished. I repeated, holding his gaze without a single ounce of pity. Because wallowing in self-isolation is not protection, Victor. It is cowardice. You are running away because it is easier to be alone than to be vulnerable. You do not understand. I understand perfectly. I interrupted, stepping even closer, forcing him to look down at me. You think pushing people away makes you a martyr. It does not. It just makes you a terrible parent to a little girl who needs her uncle, and frankly, an incredibly exhausting man to have romantic feelings for. Victor completely stopped breathing. His slate gray eyes widened, the homicidal Mafia boss thoroughly short-circuiting once again. "Romantic feelings," he repeated softly as if he had never heard the words before. "Yes, Mr. Romano," I said, refusing to break eye contact even as my own pulse hammered in my throat. "Now, are you going to continue hiding in this dark office like a petulant child, or are you going to put on a clean shirt and help me grade these kindergarten coloring assignments?" Victor stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. The tension in his jaw slowly uncoiled. The The crushing, suffocating guilt in his eyes did not vanish entirely, but it fractured, letting a desperate sliver of hope bleed through. Slowly, carefully, he took a step toward me. The annual Little Stars Spring Festival in Central Park is less of a celebration and more of a decentralized hostage situation fueled by organic cotton candy. It is a grueling 4-hour endurance test where I am expected to manage 30 sugar-crazed toddlers, arbitrate disputes over face-painting territorial lines, and placate hyper-competitive Upper East Side mothers. It is my least favorite day of the academic calendar. At 1 p.m., I was standing by the bouncy castle armed with a clipboard and a whistle contemplating the legal repercussions of walking into the lake when a hush fell over the face-painting station. I turned around. Victor Romano had arrived. He did not arrive in a matte black SUV. He did not have Bruno, Frankie, or Silas flanking him like gargoyles. For the first time since I had met him, he was not wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than my student loans. He was wearing dark denim jeans and a fitted black Henley shirt that did absolutely nothing to hide the terrifying breadth of his shoulders or the intricate dark tattoos creeping up his forearms. He was holding Rosie's hand. That alone would have been enough to short-circuit the local PTA, but Victor had taken it a step further. Draped over his massive, intimidating frame, tied neatly at the waist, was a bright yellow apron. Emblazoned across the chest in cheerful bubble-letter font were the words, "Kiss the Grill Master." I stared at him. A hedge fund mother next to me dropped her sparkling water. Victor scanned the chaotic lawn with the cold, calculating eyes of a predator assessing a battlefield locked onto my beige cardigan and marched directly toward the barbecue station. For the next 2 hours, the undisputed boss of the East Coast underworld commandeered the preschool grill. It was the most intense culinary operation I had ever witnessed. Victor treated flipping hot dogs with the grim, focused severity of disposing of criminal evidence. He arranged the hamburger buns with absolute geometric precision. When a wealthy dad in a polo shirt tried to offer him unsolicited advice on charcoal distribution, Victor simply stopped moving, leveled a dead-eyed stare at the man, and held a pair of steel tongs like a lethal weapon until the man awkwardly backed away. Rosie, meanwhile, was having the time of her life running back and forth with paper plates, completely oblivious to the fact that her uncle was terrifying the local tax bracket. I watched him from a distance, leaning against a large oak tree. I watched the way he carefully wiped mustard off Rosie's chin. I watched the way his shoulders relaxed when she laughed, and I realized with a quiet, terrifying certainty that I was completely, irreversibly in love with a homicidal mafia boss who could not figure out how to fold a pop-up tent. By 5:30 p.m., the festival was finally winding down. The bouncy castle was deflating. The sugar crashes had commenced. The setting sun was casting a warm golden hue over the Manhattan skyline. I was packing up the craft table under the oak tree when I heard heavy footsteps approaching. I did not need to look up to know who it was. The air pressure always shifted when he walked into my space. "Mr. Romano," I said, stacking a pile of construction paper. "Your hot dog distribution was highly efficient. You maintained excellent crowd control." Victor stopped on the other side of the table. He had taken off the ridiculous yellow apron, though he was still looking at me with an intensity that made my pulse completely abandon its steady rhythm. He looked exhausted, but there was a sharp, unyielding resolve in his slate gray eyes. "Julian," he said. He did not offer a bouquet of roses. He did not recite poetry. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. He slid it across the craft table, stopping right on top of a drawing of a glittery dinosaur. I looked at the folder, then up at him. "Is this a hit list, Victor? Because I am currently off the clock." "Open it," he said, his voice dropping into that low, gravelly baritone that vibrated right through my chest. I picked up the folder and opened it. Inside was a stack of legal documents printed on heavy stock paper. I adjusted my glasses and scanned the top page. Irrevocable power of attorney. I flipped to the next page. Complete asset authorization. I flipped to the third page, my breath catching slightly in my throat. Transfer of joint legal guardianship for Rosalind Romano. I stared at the paperwork. This was not a gift. This was the keys to his entire empire. This was a man who had spent his whole life building impenetrable walls, handing me the master code, and dismantling every single defense mechanism he possessed. "I do not know how to do romance, Julian," Victor said softly. The space between us felt electrified heavy with the weight of what he was offering. "I do not know how to be normal. I live in a world that is ugly and violent, and I know I have no right to drag you into it. He stepped around the table, closing the distance between us. He stopped mere inches away, looking down at me with a vulnerability that completely shattered my heart. But I also know how to protect what is mine. Victor continued, his voice fiercely steady. With this, you have the authority to make decisions for Rosie if something happens to me. You have access to every resource I own. I cannot promise you a simple life, but I can promise you that you will never have to face a single threat alone. He reached out his large, rough hand, gently cupping the side of my face, his thumb brushing over my cheekbone. Be my exception, Julian, he whispered. Be my only exception. The park around us faded into static. There was only him, only this terrified, ruthless, beautiful man asking me to step into the fire with him. I looked at the legal documents in my hand. Then I reached into the breast pocket of my cardigan and pulled out my red grading pen. Victor blinked, momentarily confused as I clicked the pen. I flipped to the second page of the guardianship agreement. I leaned over the table, circled a word in bright red ink, and drew a harsh line through it. Your lawyers misspelled fiduciary in paragraph 4, section B, I said, evenly tapping the paper. It is entirely unprofessional. Victor stared at me, thoroughly paralyzed. I capped the red pen, tucked it back into my pocket, and looked up into his stunned gray eyes. I let a small, genuine smile break through my professional facade. Sign the bottom line, you idiot, I said softly. The tension snapped. Victor let out a sound that was half laugh, half exhale. Before I could process the movement, his arms wrapped around my waist, lifting me off the grass entirely. He kissed me with a desperate, overwhelming warmth, burying his face in my neck like a drowning man who had finally found the shore. I wrapped my arms around his broad shoulders, breathing in the scent of charcoal expensive cologne and absolute safety, completely resigning myself to the beautiful, chaotic reality that my life would never be organized again. It has been exactly 1 year, 2 months, and 4 days since my meticulously curated beige and white sanctuary was officially compromised. The physical boundary fell first. Last October, Victor hired a team of highly terrified, extremely well-paid contractors to knock down the adjoining wall between my modest apartment and his sprawling high-altitude mausoleum of a penthouse. The result is a chaotic architectural hybrid. On the left side, you have the cold, intimidating expanse of dark marble steel accents and expensive leather. On the right side, you have a vibrant, inescapable explosion of pastel toys, organic craft supplies, and an ever-expanding collection of aggressively cheerful educational posters. I call it hostile kindergarten takeover. Victor calls it home. It was 10 a.m. on a Sunday. I was standing in the center of the expanded living room, dressed in a comfortable cashmere sweater and my standard beige trousers. I was holding my wooden pointer ruler, tapping it gently against a white dry erase board that I had specifically ordered for these occasions. My audience was seated precisely 3 feet in front of me. They were not sitting on expensive Italian leather chairs. They were sitting cross-legged on a giant interlocking foam puzzle mat patterned with the alphabet. The undisputed terrifying overlords of the East Coast underworld were attending my mandatory weekend seminar on early childhood development. Gentlemen, I said, my voice projecting with clear academic authority, let us review the parameters of the 5-year-old autonomy phase. As Rosie approaches her 5th birthday, she will begin to assert her independence. This will manifest in defiance. She will say no. She will refuse assistance. I paced in front of the whiteboard, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. When this occurs, I continued pointing the ruler directly at Bruno. We do not view it as a breach of syndicate hierarchy. We view it as a healthy neurological milestone. Do you understand? Bruno, a man whose biceps were literally larger than my torso, nodded grimly. He was holding a tiny pink sparkly notebook and a matching gel pen with a fluffy feather on top. He wrote something down with the intense sweating focus of a man defusing a bomb. Mr. Hayes. Bruno raised a massive hand, his voice a deep rumble. If the subject refuses the organic broccoli, is it acceptable to initiate a tactical distraction? Define tactical distraction, Bruno, I said smoothly, like showing her the new kitten video on my phone while Silas stealth inserts the vegetable into her oral cavity. I sighed, adjusting my glasses. While stealth insertion is a creative approach, it builds mistrust in the feeding environment. We do not trick her. We offer 2 acceptable choices. Rosie, do you want the broccoli with cheese or with butter? The illusion of control is paramount. Silas, sitting next to Bruno, nodded slowly. The deadliest sniper in New York was currently wearing an apron with a cartoon frog on it and having just finished meal prepping 3 days' worth of nutritionally balanced, animal-shaped bento boxes. A classic psychological flanking maneuver, Silas noted in a deadpan monotone. I approve. To Silas's right was Frankie. Frankie, the man who handled the Romano family's most violent interrogations, was currently sitting perfectly, terrifyingly still. He had to, because Rosie, sitting on her knees behind him, was deeply focused on weaving several brightly colored plastic butterfly clips into his dark hair. Uncle Frankie, do not move your head. You are ruining the symmetry. Rosie scolded, her little brow furrowed in severe concentration. I am sorry, Principessa, Frankie whispered, freezing instantly. He looked at me with wide, panicked eyes, silently pleading for help. I offered him exactly zero sympathy. And then there was Victor. Victor was sitting at the edge of the alphabet mat, leaning back on his hands, completely ignoring the dry erase board. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a fitted black t-shirt. The heavy, suffocating shadows that used to live permanently under his eyes were completely gone. The ruthless, glacial aura of the Mafia Don had softened into something warm, settled, and incredibly dangerous to my cardiovascular health. He was not taking notes. He was just watching me. Mr. Romano, I said, tapping the ruler on his knee. You are not paying attention. The emotional volatility of a 5-year-old is not something you can shoot your way out of. I am paying perfect attention, Julian. Victor murmured, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that still sent a very unprofessional shiver down my spine. I am just observing the instructor. He is highly effective and very beautiful when he is being bossy. Frankie choked on a laugh. Silas shook his head in disgust. Bruno kept writing in his pink notebook, completely oblivious to the blatant flirting. Inappropriate classroom behavior, Mr. Romano. I said, though I could feel the traitorous warmth creeping up my neck. I lowered the ruler. Class dismissed. Silas, it is snack time. Copy that, Silas said, standing up with military precision and marching toward the kitchen. Chaos immediately resumed. Rosie finished her masterpiece, leaving Frankie looking like a heavily tattooed, scarred fairy princess. She shrieked with laughter, launching herself off the mat. Bruno instantly dropped his pink notebook and scrambled after her, transforming the living room into an obstacle course. I turned away from the noise, picked up an eraser, and began wiping down the whiteboard. A moment later, I felt the familiar, heavy shift in the air pressure. Broad chest pressing against my back, strong arms wrapping securely around my waist, pulling me flush against him. Victor rested his chin on my shoulder, breathing in the scent of my lavender detergent. You tamed them, Victor said softly, watching his 3 deadliest enforcers argue over who got to pour Rosie's apple juice. You domesticated the entire East Coast underworld with a wooden ruler and a seating chart. I did not tame anyone, I corrected, leaning back into his solid warmth, letting my hands rest over his where they were clasped at my stomach. I simply provided a structured syllabus. They did the reading. Victor chuckled, a deep, rich sound that vibrated against my back. He turned his head, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the side of my neck. And what about me? Did I do the reading? You, I said, turning slightly in his arms so I could look up into his striking slate gray eyes, are a chronic overachiever, though your handwriting on the permission slip still needs work. Victor smiled. It was the smile he saved entirely for this apartment, for these walls. A smile entirely devoid of armor. I looked at the man holding me. I looked at the chaotic, noisy, fiercely protective family we had accidentally built. I thought about my old, perfectly silent beige and white life and realized with absolute clarity that perfection was not a sterile coffee table or a quiet room. Perfection was this beautiful, messy, violent group of men who were willing to learn how to be gentle just because I asked them to. I love you, Victor whispered, his hand coming up to cup my cheek, his thumb brushing over my skin with reverent care. More than my life, Julian. I reached up, pulling him down by the collar of his t-shirt to kiss him. It was a slow, deep, devastatingly warm kiss that tasted like expensive coffee and absolute safety. I know, I said softly against his lips, smiling as a plastic toy block flew past us and bounced off the marble wall. Now go help Bruno. If he steps on that Lego, he is going to cry, and I am not filling out an incident report today.